It's starting. Hello, everyone. I'm here with the Distributist, and we're going to be doing a short discussion on G.K. Chesterton, and more specifically his 1908 novel, The Man Who Was Thursday. So, first off, I'm going to do an overall summary of the plot and characters just to bring everyone up to speed. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to do so now. And if you're lazy like me, you can just listen to the 6-hour audiobook that's on YouTube. So, how's it going?
Good, thanks. It's also on, I believe it's also on LibriVox too, if you don't want to pay for it.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, that's a good recording as well.
Yeah, I have the book itself, and I listen to it on a LibriVox recording.
There's also a very famous Orson Welles radio play version of The Man Who Was Thursday. Mm-hmm. It's not obviously as famous as his War of the Worlds radio play, but I thought it was pretty compelling nonetheless.
Okay. Well, anyways, to start off with an overall plot, the overall plot of The Man Who Was Thursday is Gabriel Syme is a poet, and he's in a basic Victorian rap battle with an anarchist poet named Lucian Gregory, who by the end, in order to convince him that he is a serious anarchist, leads him into a meeting of an anarchist council. Now, the members of the council are all named after days of the week, with the mysterious and terrifying Mr. Sunday as the president of the council. Gregory wants to get to the post of Thursday. Syme poses as an anarchist and challenges Gregory's claim, and he is awarded the title. Afterwards, Syme is recruited by the police to undermine the anarchists, and at their next meeting, it's revealed that they plan to blow up the French president and the Tsar in Paris. However, during the course of the meeting and on their escapades in France, it's revealed that one by one, every single member of the council, except Sunday, were all working for the police. And the characters return to London, where they chase down Sunday, where they learn he was actually the policeman who revealed to them, who gave them their mission in the first place. And by the end, they're all led to Mr. Sunday's mansion, where they're at a fancy ball, and each one of them is given a seat of honor and is dressed as one of the 7 days of creation, with Mr. Sunday revealing himself to be the peace of God. The book ends with Simon Gregory making peace and walking in Saffron Park, where the story all began. So I think to kind of start off with, like, the first kind of major section of the book is the first chapter, The Poets of Saffron Park, where you have Gabriel Syme and Lucian Gregory kind of debating and discussing the nature of order versus anarchy.
Yes. That's actually, I think the book is sort of very compelling in its first few chapters and its last few chapters. Mm-hmm. Where with the middle, when I first read the book, I felt the middle sort of lagged a little bit. But I think it sort of comes together both. It sort of bookended very well by the philosophical point that Chesterton brings up at the beginning and then revisits at the end. And I think Chesterton is sort of very good at doing this, of essentially building fictional narratives around very compelling characters that are still fundamentally allegories. And I've never seen an author really do this, sort of build an allegorical story that nonetheless it has compelling characters in it. Yeah,
very much so. Is like, I got the impression, especially after I finished the book, is that it's a very two-leveled book. You have the very basic story, until the very end. It's basically just a detective novel of someone trying to infiltrate a bunch of anarchists trying to blow up the French president. But Obviously it's revealed, there's something far, far bigger going on. And I actually really like the fact that you have the main villain is actually the main, is essentially the peace of God at the very end. And strangely, when you just say it like that, it makes no sense whatsoever. But by the end of the book, it makes perfect sense.
He is the Christ, in other words.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and I would definitely agree with you. The middle does get a bit kind of boring or dull, especially particularly right before Gabriel Syme is going to go off to France. He's discussing with Professor de Worms, who is one of the first people he starts working with that he knows is another policeman. And they just keep going on and on and on. And all you had to do was just go, yep, we're both working on the same page. Let's go to France. Mm. Because the middle of it, it's just like, it's basically just trying to throw us off and build some sort of suspense or create a villain of, because you really have some terrifying moments where they're in this French field, and you have the secretary, I think he's Monday, and he's basically in a black mask with like this huge horde of black cloaked figures, and they're just running towards this little band of men, and then they end up getting this massive fight on the beach when they're like, no, we're all on the same side.
I thought it was, I mean, I think the nightmare, it is literally entitled The Man Who Was Thursday, and the subheading is A Nightmare, which I think is sort of, it has a surrealist quality to it. And I think, you know, it's kind of strange. This Chesterton's works, this is not, sorry, a unique work in Chesterton's library. He has a number of other similar stories. In fact, most of his stories follow this very surrealist pattern. They're allegories that nonetheless feature these sort of individually compelling characters, which is sort of weird for allegorical fiction. And The Ball and the Cross is another good example that falls. This is simply the best one of I think, this particular form. But what's odd is this particular way, this particular story, it sort of prefigures a lot of other 20th century fiction, in particular surrealist and existentialist novels. Say, for instance, The Stranger, The Plague by Camus, and even some of the absurdist stuff by Buñuel and what is that other artist, Salvador Dali. A lot of their cinema also follows this absurdist pattern. Samuel Beckett's another good example. But what's sort of strange about this is that Chesterton has almost the exact, he wrote about 10 or 20 years before all these artists, and he has, in some ways, the exact opposite philosophical perspective as the existentialist and absurdist authors that sort of follow him.
Yeah, I mean, again, the whole point of it, you know, obviously beginning with the debate, because, you know, it does have a superficial philosophy. Not to say it's not a good, you know, criticism of anarchy itself, but the, you know, the idea of anarchy versus order, that's kind of the superficial layer to, that's the superficial conflict over the overarching, you know, kind of main theme of the novel that's revealed at the end.
And of course, it's additionally ironic because the sort of obsession with anarchy would be essentially the motivation for people like and Buñuel and Beckett that came after Chesterton and wrote sort of what I consider very, very similar narratives. So it's almost like Chesterton's having a dialogue with artists that have not yet started writing yet.
Yeah, he seemed to be like, it almost seems like he was born just a bit too early or a bit too late, because I very much get from like some other stuff I've read of him. I mean, I'm going to go more extensively into his other works after this, but he very much seems like he wanted to be the anti-Nietzsche.
He is the anti-Nietzsche very much. And one thing that Nietzsche and Chesterton have in common is they're both very prophetic figures. In many ways, both Nietzsche and Chesterton always seem to be arguing with movements and refuting thinkers that have not yet been born yet. For instance, when we're talking about Albert Camus, The Stranger, who I think that's a very similar work to The Man Who Was Thursday in a lot of regards. He was born 3 years after the publication of The Man Who Was Thursday. And, you know, a lot of these other elements, you know, anarchism, and I guess anarchism was old at that time. That was certainly
it wasn't really because Chesterton was also like he was still responding to like one of the main concerns of the day, because, you know, anarchy was the early 20th century's version of, you know, Islamic terrorists or, you know, the communists. Because everyone back then, everyone was afraid of like some anarchist throwing a bomb. But, you know, the fact I was going to go off on that is that, you know, the thing about Chesterton is he does definitely seem to be prophetic in that, especially with his work, you know, Eugenics and Other Evils, where he was in a period where the idea of eugenics was just starting, and everyone, you know, kind of dismissed criticism of it and thought that, you know, oh, this is the future. And then as seen through when, you know, eugenics was actually applied in, you know, Nazi Germany, everyone saw, oh, wait, maybe eugenics is a bad thing. And now basically you can use the word eugenics as a derogatory term.
Yeah, I have a hard time commenting on Eugenics and Other Evils because it's one of the few Chesterton that I haven't read. So I'll post. I won't post a comment on that. But I think that's one of the unusual things about Chesterton is people get sort of a very prophetic quality to him. I know some Catholic thinkers always call him the prophet G.K. Chesterton or something like that. Because, but I think Nietzsche is very similar. Nietzsche, he has all these ideas that seem to kind of like be ahead of their times in a lot of ways. Even that's one thing that one reason why Chesterton and Nietzsche kind of lived on, and I see them as very much opponents of each other, is because of that similar feature they have. Whereas, the existentialists always seem to be very much writing in a particular time and place. You can't really take Boone well out of the 30s so much, or the 30s or 40s so much, because he's just so much in that time frame.
And then, like the fact is, though, I think comparing, because I've also read The Stranger, and comparing an existentialist work to Chesterton's work, is the key difference is that Chesterton ends up obviously asserting that there is actually a deeper meaning to all of this, that life is not without meaning.
It's almost the exact photo-negative opposites. The existentialist's moniker was that form precedes essence. But when you talk about a Christian perspective, and in particular the Christian perspective of the word, the logos of God, under that, the essence precedes the form. And so it's an exact refutation of the existentialist motif.
I mean, even the Man Who Is Thursday explicitly kind of points this out in the fact that they all end up being literally the days of creation. And the leader of them is the essence, the peace of God.
Yes, the word of God that precedes creation. And then, so that's. I know Jewish people will be screaming at the top of their lungs, but the peace of God was on Saturday. But,
or the Seventh-day Adventists.
Yeah, well, and they're actually true. Christians do celebrate the first day of creation, not the last day, or the first day of the new creation, rather than the peace that precedes the rebirth. And early Christians would have said just that.
But I don't really think there's a problem with doing it on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, these things, you always speak in the motif of your times, and in the Christian understanding, difference between the first day and the seventh day kind of get blurred a little bit, and it's perfectly fine. We know what Chesterton is trying to say. It doesn't. Yeah,
I don't think God sends people to hell for going to church on Sunday or Saturday.
No, I think it's just a motif of how we've arranged our language, and the difference between how early Christians were setting up the celebration of the Sabbath and how later Christians came to interpret that.
But anyways, getting back to the book, is the thing I actually really like is what I was getting on about the fact that the argument between order and anarchy, because would you kind of agree that the anarchy versus order argument is kind of somewhat more superficial, whereas the idea of the peace of God is kind of the ultimate core of that's the deeper meaning behind the book?
Yes.
Because it's revealed the entire anarchist plot was completely fake and was false the entire way through. But I mean, I like the fact that he can still have a superficial narrative, but he can still make a lot of really kind of witty and because the thing is, Gabriel Syme may have not, Lucian Gregory may have not actually been working for a real anarchist movement, but the debate he has with Syme is still just as edifying. When he says that, when they're debating what's better, the tree or the lamppost, that does still have just as much meaning, even if it's not an actually true thing. Which again, I think it points out a nice kind of way Chesterton would kind of polarize, or would kind of flip on its head a lot of probably more modern ideas that, saying that, the supernatural isn't real, but maybe the lessons they teach are real. In The Man Who Is Thursday, the supernatural is the actual reality, whereas the man-made thing, the anarchy versus order, that's the false thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I always think when I think the tree versus the lamppost of sort of the motivating imagistic behind Narnia, right, which was the lamppost in the forest.
Yeah. I mean, the great line that, when Syme is saying, why order is actually the real beautiful thing, that an artist is inherently attracted to the idea of order, because Gregory says the artist is an anarchist, and the anarchist is an artist, is when Syme says the common thing is to miss the mark, the uncommon thing is to hit it.
Yes. And this is, I think, sort of fundamentally how Genesis is set up too, right? Like people oftentimes read Genesis first, there was nothing, and then there was God. But if you look to the actual Hebrew, I think it's on the second version of Genesis. It's not so much a formation of the world out of nothingness, but a formation of the world out of chaos. Which some translations include as the waters, but I think the chaos is actually a more apt description of the original Hebrew translation, or at least I've been told by scholars, which I think is kind of an interesting thing to think about, right? That the application of creation is really more a formation of order, rather than some kind of ex nihilo formation from nothingness.
I mean, yeah, because definitely I would still say the debate between order and anarchy is prevalent and does lead into the ultimate idea of the peace of God. But just trying to think of what else to say. But I would say it also is but as a novel itself, as an actual just story of a character going through a change, I think it also works pretty well. I love a lot of the very detailed, because I really like kind of detailed, kind of cozy imagery. Like I love I think my most vivid scene is when Lucian Gregory leads Gabriel to the little restaurant in London, and they order a meal, and he's like, I just love the little touch where he goes, I never, because like.
Is it the line that he says, I've never had a nightmare that's led to a lobster. It usually works the other way around.
Yes, I love that line.
Yeah, that's a really,
yeah.
Everything about that has sort of this, very haunting nature to it.
It's extremely indicative of Chesterton, isn't it? He loved to turn all this. He loves turning this stuff inside out, and has this very whimsical, mystic, almost mystic quality to him, doesn't he?
Yeah, and this is why I really wish, I don't think it ever has, but I think it's sort of a crime that The Man Who Was Thursday has not been adopted for the stage, because the sort of very haunting quality that you get from sort of a very specific story, that's the only way I can put it. I think you put it as sort of cozy imagery. Thrives on the stage more than anywhere else. I don't know if you could really make a movie about it, but somehow I feel that it would really make an excellent stage play.
Yeah, I think you could make. I don't think they could make a movie about it today, because it would have to have way too much action and drama and all that. But I mean, I think back in the 40s or 50s, they could definitely do something more with that, when movies were just more about having characters and interesting dialogue rather than being all about action. But I think you could make.
This is a very famous radio play written by Orson Welles. I don't know if you're a big Orson Welles fan, but
no.
You don't like Orson Welles?
I have not seen his movies.
Oh, you have not? Oh my God.
Yes.
Well,
I'm a cultural desert. I'll watch every movie he's ever been in after this. But back to the book. Yeah.
Yeah, sure thing. I shouldn't get into my culture decisions, but
it's perfectly fine. Hey, at least I did read this book. So, anyways, with the book is it also, again, because I remember reading, and you recited beautifully the kind of last part of Chesterton's "What's Wrong with the World," where the kind of conclusion that the the individual is a sacred, the individual, like the girl with the red hair is a sacred being, and that's what society should be centered around. You actually kind of see elements of that in The Man Who Was Thursday, where
I think it actually ends on the exact same imagistics, the girl with the red hair.
Yep.
Which is strange, because it almost is as if what's wrong with the world is sort of the political manifesto that accompanies The Man Who Was Thursday.
They were I think published around the same year. Like 1908.
Oh yeah, I'm sure.
But yeah, like when they're in France and they're trying to figure, when they're like worried that, oh my God, everyone in the world is becoming an anarchist. Like literally, one of the chapters is just called "The Earth and Anarchy," because you really actually end up thinking that like some sort of anarchist uprising has taken place around the entire world, and that either just Britain or just these 5 people are the only people that are not in on the anarchists, and they're like debating who would be an anarchist or not beforehand, and they're pointing to like this kind of stout, Catholic French farmer, going, this is the person that we can always trust. He's never going to lead us astray. And it's kind of that same kind of glorification, not of the kind of it's an interesting kind of twist on individualism that go ahead.
I mean, it's strange because I found this problem with Chesterton a lot before. It's just impossible to sort of describe the delight of reading him in the abstract. The plots never seem to be quite as good as they're made, because when he creates sort of what would otherwise be a ridiculous situation where 10 individuals can somehow change the political order such that when you come out of a meeting with these 7 individuals, you are under the impression that the world might actually be altered by them in some kind of weird, mystical, nightmarish way. But that's exactly what he creates. That's exactly the impression he creates.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, with the plot, again, as I was trying to describe it, it does sound absolutely ridiculous. It almost like, the end of the novel seems like a non sequitur to the rest of the story, because like the rest of the story is a fairly believable basic idea of an ordinary guy who was recruited by the police to infiltrate a bunch of anarchists to stop a terrorist attack. That's a solid thing. But when you think about how does it end? Well, they chase the guy down who started this, and he ends up being God, and they all have a party. It's like, what? But it makes perfect sense when you actually read it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a it is literally it's more like a Balthazar's feast moment, right? It's not Balthazar's feast, but it is sort of the feast of love, an emblematic moment of peacemaking.
I mean, I almost find, when they finally figure out that every single member of the Anarchist Council was a member of the police force, and they say, we're going to go back to... There's definitely a massive tonal shift to kind of help ease into it, wherein they just go on to this complete... Mr. Sunday stops being this absolutely terrifying figure, this, giant, dark, monster that eats, like... it's like when they describe him eating, he's just like downing like several cups of coffee in a few minutes, and eating mass amounts of food and just terrifying everyone. Just this absurd kind of cartoon villain. He's like stealing an elephant, riding in a hot air balloon, and just flying away, and just giving each one of these people. He ends up ultimately kind of being like the Joker a bit.
Yeah, I know, and this is what they say. I find this true in this very, very few spiritual experiences I've had, that the truly holy is accompanied by the same kind of horror that accompanies the demonic. Or I should say, not horror, I should say terror, right? That an encounter with something that's truly spiritual oftentimes strikes people's hearts with fear, even if it is essentially holy. And as such, during the early stages of a spiritual experience, it might not be clear whether somebody is in contact with something angelic or something demonic.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, it's the whole thing with the fear of God, because the fact is,
Yes.
God is
Precisely.
There's a perfect line that encapsulated this in Chronicles of Narnia, when one of the little creatures, I can't remember, not Mr. Tumnus, one of the gophers, or one of those.
I think it's like the Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, right?
Yeah, the beavers. When they're describing Aslan, he's like,
Yes.
oh, he's terrible, but he's great. He's like he's terrifying, but he's great, but he's good.
And
like,
there's a moment
terrifying.
when the children hear the name, they sort of shudder in this kind of strange, a sort of chill sets over them, right?
Because even because like going back to the Man Who Was Thursday, when they end up kind of describing him, it's I love how like each one of the characters has this very different experience of Thursday. Of he's confusing to one person, he's terrifying to another, but I think the way Syme described him is that he's so indicative of the world, or that you look at the world from the outs, from it's described as like the face of Mr. Sunday is beautiful, is absolutely beautiful and lovely to behold, so that the evilness that's his backside is just something you can kind of dismiss. Whereas if you look at him from the back, you realize the good in the world is only fleeting. There's only the evil.
And this is what always separates the portrayals of Christ that are fundamentally good from the ones that are just impossible to stomach. Do you ever see that terrible Kevin Smith movie, Dogma?
No.
Okay, well, it's a bad movie, and you shouldn't see it. Well, it's kind of funny, but like it's making fun of Christianity, so the theology is crap. But pardon me, I was swearing there. But there is part of the movie that is quite funny, which is this Catholic cardinal called, I think it's Cardinal. It's played by George Carlin. Cardinal Glick. What?
Of course it is.
Cardinal Glick. And Cardinal Glick is this Novus Ordo cardinal. It's the best part of the movie by far. And he says, the Catholic Church needs to move into the new age, So because of that, we're retiring the crucifix, because Jesus didn't come into this world to give us the willies. It's like, and we're introducing instead your buddy Jesus, and it's like this hip statue with like Jesus popping a thumbs up and like doing a "I got you, dude" sign, and it just like the image of but this is sort of the image of Jesus that sort of pervades popular culture, and it's the reason why all the movies I saw about Jesus, and even the sort of artsy ones like The Last Temptation of Christ, which was supposed to be a very mature, like dark vision of Christ. Jesus does not have a very an image that sort of commands the fear I imagined a lot of his apostles had of him. And this is why, actually, I think The Passion of Christ was so successful.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Who played Jesus in there, and the original Ben-Hur, they didn't show his face, but you got the same impression that he struck people both with joy and terror, and there is this sort of awe that people had in his presence. I
mean, the thing is, like, that's why I think the movie Risen is real. That came out this year was really, really good, because you get that same, like, there's a scene in it where, because the basic plot of it is a Roman soldier is recruited to kind of be a detective to find where they put Jesus's body, to put down, all this nonsense about him being risen from the dead. And obviously he ends up finding Jesus, but he's interviewing kind of people that listened to him or that talked to him. And like he's interrogating this old blind woman, and basically the way she's saying it, she's like, she basically says like, he's because he started his ministry, he started the church, we've already been scattered like seeds. It's too late for you. You're all going to go, Rome is going down. And it's a genuinely kind of terrifying moment.
Yes. Yeah, I haven't seen the movie, but
it's a good movie.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. Hello?
Okay, I laid out. Hello? Yeah, we're getting some breakup here. So I'm generally very skeptical of these Bible epics. Like, for instance, the new Ben. Have you seen the Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston?
I think I saw it a long time ago. I don't remember very much of it, though.
It's quite good. It's probably the best of the sort of sword and sandal epics. The other ones, Quo Vadis and The Robe, just are kind of schmaltzy.
Although Quo Vadis does have one of my favorite ancient Roman figures, Patronesses, because
the sort of that actually was the more compelling story.
I mean, I always imagine Petronius, because I also learned about him in my Latin class, so it's like I imagine Petronius is just like he's basically Seneca but wore sunglasses and a leather jacket.
Yeah, you imagine he would have gotten a lot of like if YouTube had existed for Patrones's time, there would be like compilation clips like Patrones's thug life, you know?
Yes, he'd be the Milo.
Yeah, I can't believe nobody. I can't believe. Yeah, he's the
Milo would be Nero. Not Milo is Nero.
Yeah, which I think is odd because I don't think Milo is a very Nero-like character.
No, he's I can't imagine Milo actually advocating people kill and do anything terrible to each other. But
I don't know. I think Milo's too much of a publicity person to be. I mean, he's too much of a court jester to be a Roman.
He's Oscar Wilde.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see if he's quite as elegant with the pen as he is with the YouTube insult. But
yeah, but I mean, the thing is, just to finish up with Patronesses, because my favorite thing about him is just the fact how badly he basically he pwned Nero, because what he did was he basically wrote down all the sexual escapades of Nero after he got the order by Nero to kill himself. He basically wrote down all the men, women, children, and animals and things that he had sex with and published them and got them as widely published and spread around Rome as possible, so everyone knew all the stuff that Nero did. Then he threw a party, smashed his signet ring so no one could have his office ever again, slit his wrists and then bound them up again and enjoyed his party, then went to his bathtub, unbound his wrists, and slowly died in his bath, comfortable, surrounded by all his friends. I mean, that's how you basically say F you to Nero.
Yeah, I mean, that guy was... I mean,
he was called the arbiter of elegance.
Yeah, I'd have to look back at that.
Yeah, I'm gonna watch Quo Vadis after this. Actually,
have you seen it?
I've seen part of it. I need to watch the rest of it though.
I just the problem with Quo Vadis is just the main protagonist, and the story around him is just incredibly uncompelling. Mm-hmm. This is my honest opinion. It's why Ben-Hur actually has a protagonist story that is compelling, so that when you go in and out of it and back to the historical characters, you're kind of still you're still interested in who Judah Ben-Hur is and that he has his house in order.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm
probably a little further away from Chesterton here.
I think it's fine. We've probably discussed a lot about The Man Who's Thursday anyway.
Well, I mean, interestingly enough, the Orthodoxy, which is the book I did recommend to you, ends very famously. It's about Christianity, but Jesus does not make an appearance until the last chapter. And I find the description of that in the last paragraph in particular to be one of the greatest ends of an apologetic work that I've ever read.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be interested to hear what you say about that. But.
Yeah, that's on my list as well.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of how else we can, because I think we can go for a little bit longer.
Okay.
But I think to 10 would be. But yeah,
with the man. Talk about Chesterton, or go ahead.
Well, is there anything else you'd have to say about Chesterton, or why you?
Oh my God, there's almost no. I mean, I guess just as a cultural phenomenon, I would have a lot to say. I mean, he's the icon I'm using.
Yeah, I especially love how, because I recognize the picture you took that from is the Hound of Distributism, but you took it away and put in it. You took the dog away and put a computer in. I think.
Well, you know where the image comes from, right?
Go ahead.
So it's a Dominican symbol. Saint Dominic's mother, on the night before she gave birth to him, legend has it that she had a vision that she gave birth to a hound that took up the torch of Christ's wisdom and spread it across the world. And the hound with the torch was the imagistic used for the Dominicans, which then called themselves Dominicanes, the hounds of God. And so I always like to think that the internet is sort of a replication of that prophecy in some regards, right?
Yeah.
That it too might be used to sort of spread the idea of
Christ.
spirituality, Christ's spirituality across the world.
Because the thing is, spirituality. Because I think the problem, I think we've discussed this a lot before, is that, you know, the reason why all these movies like God's Not Dead and all this stuff don't work is when you're just bashing people over the head with the message of, you know, Jesus is God, God is good, God's not dead. People don't really, people just go, okay, that's your, you know, it's too aggressive, it's too forceful. And,
well,
you know,
it misunderstands. I said this before, but you can't. These movies don't make sense unless you accept the premises of the movie.
Yeah.
And so,
yes.
Working to try to move the premises as opposed to like pounding the premises into you with a sledgehammer and then trying to get you to accept them, because people's no movie has ever accomplished that.
Because the thing is, like, you know, when, you know, one of the reasons why Christianity spread so quickly and so well in the ancient world is because people already understood that people believe that there was a spirituality and there were gods. Like when St. Paul goes to Athens, or when he goes to the Greek city and talks about, you know, he sees they even have a statue dedicated to an unknown god. They're already accepting the premise that there is this god, there is a god they don't know about, and he's able to teach them about that. When you have people going, yeah, I don't accept that there is spirituality, I don't, you know, accept that there is a god. If you keep telling people about the Christian message in that way, it doesn't work.
There's two twin pillars of Christianity that really, they're sort of equivalent to the two main commandments that Jesus laid out in several of the Gospels, of the love of neighbor and the love of neighbor and the love of God.
Yeah.
And I think in the ancient world, really the premise that was missing was the fundamental dignity of man and the universal love to man. So the task of Paul and the disciples at that point was really to take a spiritual force that was universally accepted and demonstrate how that was embodied in the neighbor. But in our current world, it's almost the exact opposite. We have sort of this independent understanding of mankind as a thing in itself that needs to be honored, but we do not really have an understanding that that has some greater calling to it.
Yeah.
So really the problem is inverted, and because of that, the older methods don't really work quite as well, or they need to be sort of reformatted.
And that's why I think we said, movies, surprisingly, like the Studio Ghibli films that like have an underlying current of spirituality in them. Like it's like it doesn't even really all that matter all that much where the spirituality is coming from, but so long as you can accept the, you know, the basic premise that there is actually something beyond the material world, that can actually do a lot. Wouldn't you agree?
No, that's the fundamental. That's directly attacking the premise, the failing premise that's in. It's I mean, the weird thing about the ages is it's almost more fundamental than. It's almost more Old Testament than it is new, right? It's more we're in this chaotic world, and here is the order of God, rather than because of this order of God, you know, we're called to this radical compassion.
And that's the thing, is like what I'm working on with my next video, it's basically I'm attacking the idea, you know, you've probably heard this a lot, is, you know, the idea of don't be a dick, and that's essentially the new moral standard that we're all called to by kind of like this unwritten code of ethics that's been written on the internet.
The most unheroic moral standard ever to emerge.
And it's basically such a step down in terms of morality from. Because essentially, in the ideal society, going off of that, there are no good people. Everyone just leaves each other alone. There could only be it only discourages people from being bad. It doesn't encourage people to be good. In their worldview, essentially, somebody like Mother Teresa or Dr. Martin Luther King are kind of like moral busybodies. That they're the people that just sat by and did nothing and just kind of didn't bother each other. They're the real good people.
And that's the thing too, right? They had to these sort of moral heroes like Mother Teresa or Martin Luther King. They either have to be portrayed as saying something that's obvious and sort of stupid in the case of King, or being sort of shaking the boat and uncomfortable figures in the case of Mother Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I mean, you know, in Mother Teresa, I mean, her mission and her real impact wasn't necessarily in you know, really putting a dent in the poverty rate at Calcutta. By the contrary, probably for her, she probably didn't do all that much because her methods were incredibly inefficient. But what her real mission was to demonstrate sort of the radical heroism of living with the poor.
Yeah, and because the thing is, you know, you contrast the idea of don't be a dick. And, you know, I'm sorry if that's a very crude statement to make, but
that's an accurate assessment of
yeah,
sort of.
It's essentially, it's like, essentially, it's a very rough translation of when Confucius said, "Don't do to others what you wouldn't want done unto yourself." Because the thing is, that's not the same thing as when Jesus said, you know, his golden rule. Because Confucius and the thing is, I'm not saying I do love Confucius. I do like.
I think it's not like, I would say it's not qualitatively different. I would just say it's the first step in an incomplete step in and of itself.
Yeah. I feel like it's somewhat inadequate answer to it's an inadequate kind of version of that statement, because it's kind of more passive, obviously, than when Jesus basically says, you know, how do you want to be treated? Well, people are going to go, well, I want to be treated really, really well. Well, that's how you should treat other people. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, you know, I think the reason why the Christian message worked so well with morality is that, you know, Jesus is a perfect moral example, and he's the highest standard. And it's not like in a religion like Islam, where God just, you know, gives you all these commandments on what's right and wrong from on high. In Christianity, Jesus actually came down and lived among us and taught us how to do this. And I think that's one of the, you know, kind of great crimes, I think, of our modern society, is that we've given up on that, because the whole don't be a dick thing, it's also very lazy, you know, because the thing is, going out and helping other people is very hard. So rather than, you know, it's almost like fat acceptance, whereas before it's like, well, it's moving the goalpost, so you're lowering the standards so you're a better person rather than trying to meet the high standards.
And sometimes this is why I think that when people look at the social justice warriors and they look at, I mean, someone got on my case for using that word because I think it's pejorative, but I don't think social justice warriors is pejorative. I would like to be called a social justice warrior. I just don't agree with them on what's social justice. But about the phenomenon of social justice warriors is inclination to sort of be a heroic moral purveyor of morality is still there, and in some sense the instinct to be that person is right. It's just fundamentally misplaced.
Yes.
And that's what's sort of fundamentally depressing about people like Thunderfoot or the Amazing Atheist. Is I'm not so sure in T.J. Kirk's mind what is the heroic state of humanity, right? Okay, so we say F you to all the religious people, and F you to all the feminists, and F you to all the Christians, and then what? We retire to our man caves to eat Cheetos and play video games until technology eventually, you know, I guess solves all our problems.
I'm trying to just, you know, what I'm trying to lay out, I guess, in other videos. We can get back to the Man Who Was Thursday, but anyways, my point is that, you know, that's my one criticism of the cultural libertarians, or a lot of these people, is that, okay, good, you've pointed out the problems. You pointed out the problems with feminism, Islam, and progressivism. What are you going to replace it with?
Yeah, I mean, but that
and I even find a lot of the, and the thing is, I find a lot of their, obviously that's the reasons why I'm not a cultural libertarian, is I find a lot of their answers kind of inadequate. I feel like, you know, a lot of those answers could kind of end up keeping the problem festering. But I think we've kind of gone off on a tangent. Do you have anything else to say about The Man Who Was Thursday? Or any final thoughts?
Well, perhaps you could. I think that we could say a lot about Chesterton if you wanted to keep on going on.
I think we can save that for when I read more books of his. I'll try and read Orthodoxy and some other stuff first. But so, do you have any last thoughts on the book, or?
Well, I don't know. Nothing that could be encapsulated in 5 minutes, certainly.
Well, in Chesterton, maybe. But yeah, all right. Well, then I guess to conclude about the book itself, I would say it's a very good book to read. It's not that long. It does get a bit dry in the middle, but like I think the problem with giving a plot summary is that, again, as I point out, like the like 90% of the novel makes a certain amount of sense, but the last 10% would be like, it almost seems like it should be a non sequitur. So you do have to kind of read the whole thing through to actually understand what it all means, but it's definitely worth a read. So I guess with that, have a good day, everyone.